All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tuning into the world of car audio, specifically how you can set up and adjust a digital signal processor, or, what's commonly called a DSP. Now, just that term DSP might sound a little intimidating, maybe overly technical.
Yeah, it could be.
But trust me, you can really take your car's entire sound system to a whole new level without needing, a degree in audio engineering.
Right. And that's really what we're going to focus on today is just getting that core understanding.
Absolutely.
Whether you've, dabbled in audio settings in your car before,
Yeah.
or if this is like a completely brand new world for you, this deep dive is designed to be, pretty straightforward and insightful. So we'll be breaking down those essential steps. We'll focus on why each adjustment really matters, especially for your listening experience.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to keep the technical talk to a bare minimum. And the goal is to walk away with some of those aha moments, not like drown in a sea of jargon.
Exactly, yeah. We want those light bulb moments for
Yeah.
sure. And to help us guide us through this process, we're going to be looking at Joseph Norton's DSP Muscle Memory Guide. Now, Joseph is the technical director for Museway USA, so, he's got a lot of experience in this area. And while his guide does have, some specific stuff related to Museway products,
Sure.
the fundamentals that he talks about are applicable to a wide range of DSPs that, are out there on the market.
Yeah, and I think what's really helpful about Joseph's guide is that it lays everything out step by step. So it's a really logical way to go through it. And our mission today is to kind of pull out those key bits of knowledge from it and make it easy for everyone to grasp those core concepts of how to set up a DSP.
Yeah.
And also appreciate that there is a sensible way to do this. There's an order of operations. It's not just, jump in and start fiddling with knobs.
Right. There's a method to the madness, for sure.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's dive right in. And the very first thing that Joseph mentions, and it's bold and underlined in the guide,
Oh, wow.
is turn the source volume down. Now, it might seem obvious,
Yeah.
but why is that so critical to do as the very first thing?
I think this step, it's really all about just protecting your speakers. I mean, you're going to go in there and you're going to start changing how the audio signals are processed,
Yeah.
how they get sent to the speakers. And before the DSP is like configured to have a safe output level and, each speaker is getting the right range of frequencies, sending a full range signal at like high volume, you could damage your speakers.
Yeah.
So by, taking that source volume down right from the get-go, you're minimizing that risk. It's just that basic safety precaution,
Yeah.
Before you start making any adjustments.
Makes total sense. Yeah. I mean, a little bit of prevention can save you a lot of headaches later on.
Right.
So.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next thing he recommends is turning off like all the extra sound shaping features that your car's radio might have. So we're talking about things like any preset EQ modes,
Right.
fade and balance adjustments, driver position settings, automatic volume leveling, even like those artificial engine noises that some cars have these days, or surround sound effects. Why does all that need to be off?
So the goal here is that when you're setting up a DSP, you want to be working with a clean, unaltered audio signal.
Okay.
So, all those extra radio features, they're essentially doing their own processing, to the sound before it even reaches the DSP.
Right.
So if you turn all that stuff off,
Mm-hmm.
then you're ensuring that the DSP is getting just like a neutral signal, a pure, uncolored signal.
Right.
And that lets it shape the sound according to, how you want to set things up. It's not trying to compensate for or build on top of, whatever the factory's put in there.
Yeah, no artificial enhancements at this stage.
Right. It's like, making sure your ingredients are like pure before you start cooking. You don't want to start with, pre-mixed stuff.
Yeah, you want that pure sonic signal to work with.
Absolutely.
Okay. And to prevent any, unexpected loud noises during setup, he says the next thing is to actually mute the DSP itself.
Right.
Now, this usually involves muting the main output volume, but also each individual channel within the DSP software.
Right.
Now, why both?
So muting that main volume, it just makes sure that absolutely no audio signal is going through the DSP at all, onto your speakers.
Right.
And then by muting each individual channel, you could start to introduce the sound, to each speaker one by one as you go through setup.
Okay.
And this prevents, you don't want any sudden blasts or pops or anything unexpected coming through a speaker that isn't configured properly yet.
Right.
So it's just a way to make sure you've got a nice quiet environment so you can really work methodically, on each part of your system.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so with those safety measures out of the way,
Yeah.
The next step is all about getting organized.
Okay.
And Joseph really recommends naming each channel in your DSP software using clear abbreviations. So he gives examples like FLT for the front left tweeter,
Right.
FRT for the front right tweeter, and so on.
Yeah.
It seems simple, but why is that so important?
This is one of those things where it's like, it's a small step, but it makes a huge difference. Because, when you're dealing with, multiple channels, each one going to a different speaker in your car, having clear and consistent names for each channel just makes it so much easier to keep track of what you're doing, like what you're adjusting, where the sound is going.
Right, yeah.
It's like having well-labeled controls in an aircraft cockpit. It just reduces the chance of errors.
Yeah.
Especially when you start getting into things like, your crossover frequencies, signal routing.
Yeah, it makes total sense. It's like
Yeah.
clear labels prevent confusion. Okay, so after naming the channels, Joseph then talks about linking channels for speakers of the same size.
Right.
So what's the benefit of doing that kind of early on in the setup?
So when you link channels together, you're basically talking about, the left and right pair for the same type of speaker.
Yeah.
So like your front left and right tweeters or your mid-range drivers. Linking them allows you to make like the exact same adjustment to both of them at the same time, at least in the initial stages. So this is particularly helpful when you're setting up your basic parameters,
Right.
like, the initial crossover points, or if you want to adjust their overall output level.
Okay.
It just helps to establish a balanced, symmetrical soundstage, right from the get-go. And you can always unlink them later
Yeah.
if you need to make more specific tweaks.
Right. Yeah. Get the broad strokes in there first.
Yeah, exactly. Just a way to kind of get the foundation in place.
Absolutely. Okay, so now we move on to guiding the audio signals. And the first thing that Joseph mentions here is setting crossovers. Now, for those who might not be familiar, what exactly do crossovers do in a car audio system?
Yeah, so think of crossovers kind of like the traffic directors
Okay.
for your speakers, right?
Right, yeah.
They basically take that whole range of audio frequencies and they divide it up into different bands, and then they send each band only to the speakers that are best equipped to handle those frequencies.
Okay.
Right. So like, your tweeters, those little tiny speakers, they're meant for high frequency sounds, like the really high notes and things. Whereas your subwoofers, those are the big guys.
Yeah.
They handle the low frequency bass.
Right.
So the crossovers make sure that each speaker is only getting the frequencies that it can play clearly, efficiently.
Okay.
Prevents distortion, and it just helps to maximize the sound quality of your entire system.
Right, yeah.
Joseph recommends starting with a 24 dB Linkwitz-Riley crossover, which is a kind of a good, general starting point for a lot of systems. It helps to get a smooth transition between the speakers.
Got it.
But, we don't need to get too deep into the weeds of like all the different crossover types.
Right. We'll keep it nice and simple here.
Yeah, just the practical steps.
So after setting those frequency boundaries with the crossovers, the next step is selecting the right input. Or inputs for each output channel in the DSP. And he also recommends turning off any unused inputs at this point.
Right.
Why is that?
So this is all about just making sure that the audio signal flows in the way you intend. Right. So you're telling the DSP which audio source in your car, whether it's your radio, your phone, whatever it is, should be routed to each speaker.
Right.
And then turning off any unused inputs, it simplifies things. It prevents any noise or interference from getting in. It's like cleaning up your workspace.
Yeah.
It's about creating that clear path for the audio.
Right. Yeah. So we've configured the channels. We've configured the signal paths. Now comes a really important step.
Okay.
Verifying those outputs.
Yeah.
Now, Joseph is really adamant that you do this one speaker at a time. Keep the volume low.
Right.
And he even gives a specific order: smallest to largest speaker, left on odd number channels, right on even. Why this order? Why? One at a time.
This is where that methodical approach really pays off.
Okay.
You're confirming that the correct physical speaker in your car is actually connected to the right channel in the DSP.
Right.
So by listening to each speaker individually at a low volume, you can hear right away if something's miswired.
Yeah.
Starting with the smaller speakers. It just helps to prevent any accidents. You don't want to send too much power to a tweeter, for example, before you know it's hooked up properly.
Right.
And the left on odd, right on even. It's a standard that a lot of people use.
Oh,
And it helps to keep things organized. So if you do run into any problems, it's easier to troubleshoot.
right, yeah.
So it's all about building that solid foundation,
Yeah.
and just double checking your work as you go.
Absolutely, yeah. A little bit of carefulness, I guess you could say, can really save you a lot of frustration.
For sure.
Okay, so after verifying the outputs, we then move on to verifying the inputs.
Right.
And this is where, after unmuting all those channels, Joseph recommends using your car radio's fade and balance controls
Yes.
to make sure the audio signal is coming from the right source channels. So why is that necessary?
So verifying the outputs, that confirmed that the DSP is talking to your speakers.
Okay.
But now verifying the inputs, this confirms that your audio source, so your head unit, your radio, is actually talking to the DSP.
Okay.
So you're using that fade and balance control to kind of direct the audio signal to different parts of your car,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just checking that the DSP is receiving the signal from the correct channels.
Right.
Left, front, rear, left, rear, right.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly common to have incorrect wiring, at the input stage as well.
Hmm.
So this is just another check to make sure everything's flowing correctly.
Got it. Connections confirmed.
Right.
So now we arrive at a really fun part, time alignment.
Yeah.
This is where things get interesting.
Yeah.
Now, Joseph's guide talks about setting the delay, using a delay calculator,
Okay.
and actually inputting measurements in inches.
Right.
So can you break down the basic idea behind time alignment? Why is this so important, especially in a car, to get that really great sound?
Yeah. So think about it this way. In a car, your speakers are all different distances from where you're sitting.
Right.
So, the sound from a closer speaker is going to reach your ears sooner than the sound from a farther speaker.
Yeah.
And even those, like, tiny differences in arrival times can make your sound stage kind of blurry.
Okay.
It's hard to tell where the instruments are, where the vocals are coming from.
Right.
So time alignment, it basically compensates for that. You're intentionally delaying the signal to those closer speakers so that everything reaches your ears at the same time.
Oh, okay.
And that just creates a much more focused, three-dimensional, realistic soundstage.
Got it. So it's like creating that perfect timing for all the sound waves.
Yeah, exactly. You're synchronizing everything.
Okay. So the guide mentions, measuring in inches from your ears to each speaker,
Yeah.
putting those into this delay calculator, but it also mentions adding like a little bit extra to those measurements,
Yeah.
depending on the type of speaker. So
Yeah.
why add a little bit?
So this is kind of an interesting point. We measure to the outside of the speaker.
Right.
But the point where the sound actually seems to come from was called the acoustic center. It can be slightly behind the speaker itself.
Okay.
So this practice of adding, maybe half an inch for a tweeter, inch for a mid-range, a little bit more for a mid-bass, this is a way to kind of compensate for that. It's based on experience.
Right.
And it helps to get that more accurate time alignment so you get
Yeah.
a more cohesive sound.
Got it. So it's like a fine-tuning thing based on kind of, experience in the specifics of the speakers themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's those little details that can really make a big difference.
Okay. So after you put those inch measurements into the calculator,
Mm-hmm.
the guide says to then actually set the delay in the DSP software using milliseconds.
Right.
Now, this seems like a really important distinction.
Yeah.
Why the switch in units? What happens if someone accidentally tries to, put inches into the milliseconds?
Yeah, so that's a crucial point. That delay calculator, what it's doing is it's taking your measurements in inches
Right.
and it's converting them to the amount of time that it takes for sound to travel that distance.
Okay.
And that time is measured in milliseconds.
Got it.
So milliseconds, that's the unit of time. That's what the DSP uses to actually apply the delay.
Okay.
If you try to put those inch values directly into the millisecond delay settings,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be way off. It's
Yeah.
going to be way too short, and your sound stage is going to be all messed up.
Yeah.
In fact, Joseph points out in the guide that if the calculator shows more delay on the passenger side than the driver's side,
Okay.
after you put in your measurements, it probably means you mixed up your left and right measurements when you put them in.
Ah, interesting. So it's a good way to kind of double check that you've got those right.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a built-in, error checking system almost.
Okay, so the inches are kind of the user-friendly way to input those distances,
Yeah,
but the DSP operates with time, which is in milliseconds.
that's it.
Okay, so the furthest speaker gets 0 delay.
Yeah,
All the closer speakers get increasing delay values. Makes sense.
right.
Okay, now we get to what Joseph calls a fork in the road.
Okay, I like it.
Tuning. He mentions two paths here. One, using a specialized microphone called an RTA mic,
Mm.
which he says is a whole different topic. We're not going to get into that today.
Yeah, that's a deeper dive for another
All
time.
right. And then a quicker method that relies on listening with your ears.
Right.
So, since we're trying to keep things approachable here,
Sure.
let's focus on that quick tune method.
Absolutely.
What does that involve?
So the quick tune is really meant for those who don't have an RTA mic.
Yep.
Or, they're just not comfortable using one yet.
Yeah.
The guide suggests leaving your left and right speakers linked.
Okay.
So, your pairs are still linked together.
Hmm.
Then you want to reduce the output level on the driver's side by about 3 dB compared to the passenger side.
Okay.
So the idea here is you're compensating for the fact that, as a driver, you're sitting off center.
Right.
So this helps to bring that sound stage, that center image more towards the middle of the car. After that, you can fine-tune to your liking
Okay.
using your equalizer settings, your EQ.
So it's more of a subjective thing, using your own ears.
Absolutely. You're the final judge.
Okay. Now, after that initial level adjustment and any EQing that you've done, the guide moves on to creating a strong sonic image,
Okay.
specifically looking at the center and then the perceived height of that soundstage.
Right.
And Joseph recommends listening to a specific song, Thanks to You, by Boz Scaggs,
Oh, good song.
with only the front speakers playing.
Yeah.
Now, what should we be listening for here?
Yeah, so that particular song, it's probably recommended because it has a very clear lead vocal.
Okay.
It's right in the center of the stereo image.
Mm-hmm.
So you're listening with just those front speakers.
Yeah.
You want to pay attention to where the singer's voice seems to be coming from.
Okay.
Ideally, it should sound like it's right in the center of your windshield.
Okay.
Or maybe just slightly above your dashboard.
Yeah.
If you've got that, then that's a good sign that your left and right speakers are working together properly.
Right. You've got that nice focused center image.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And if the vocals don't sound centered, he mentions the possibility of polarity issues.
Okay.
Now, how can the polarity of a speaker, like electrically, affect that center image? And what's the technique that Joseph recommends for correcting it?
So you got to think of your speakers, as kind of pushing and pulling air.
Yeah.
To create those sound waves, right?
Right.
And polarity refers to the direction that the speaker cone moves when it receives a positive signal.
Okay.
So if one speaker in a pair is wired with the opposite polarity, one speaker might be pushing out while the other one's pulling in.
At the same time.
Yeah, for the same signal.
Okay.
And that can cause the sound waves to kind of cancel each other out.
Yeah.
Especially in those frequencies where both speakers are playing. So that results in like a weak center image. It might sound blurry. It might be pulled to one side. So the way to check for this and fix it, he says to mute all but one pair of speakers. So just your front mid-ranges, for example.
Okay.
And listen to that center image. If it's not well-defined, then you go into your DSP software.
Right.
Flip the polarity on just one of those two speakers.
Okay.
And listen again. If the center image gets better, more focused, then you've probably fixed a polarity issue.
Right.
And then you can repeat that for any other speaker pairs.
Got it. So it's a little bit of, detective work.
Yeah, it is. It's like it's using your ears to kind of figure out what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, the guide then talks about the perceived height of the soundstage, especially if it sounds like the vocals are coming from down low, like near your feet.
Yeah.
Joseph mentions gapping the crossovers as one potential way to kind of lift that stage.
Okay.
So what does that mean?
Yeah, so gapping the crossovers, it basically means creating a small frequency range where neither of the two adjacent speakers is really playing that well.
Okay.
So, for example, if your mid-range speakers are set to play up to 3 kilohertz and your tweeters start at 3 kilohertz,
Right.
gapping the crossover, you might lower that upper limit on your mid-range to maybe 2.5 kilohertz.
Okay.
So you've got a little gap there before the tweeter kicks in.
Okay.
And the idea is that that little separation, it can sometimes trick your ears into thinking the sound is coming from higher up.
Okay.
But, there is a trade-off. If you gap the crossovers too much, you can actually end up with like a dip in your frequency response.
Right.
Which can make the sound thin, lacking a little body.
Okay.
So it's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
He also mentions another way to raise that stage height, and that's to add a little bit of delay. to your mid-range and tweeters together.
Okay, as a pair.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So it's, playing around with that crossover point.
Yeah.
Or adding a little bit of delay to those speakers as a pair.
Right, yeah. It's about finding what works for your ears,
Yeah,
and for your particular setup.
exactly. Finding that balance.
Absolutely.
Okay, so after all that careful adjustment, the last step, and a really important one, is making sure you don't lose all your work.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
And Joseph really emphasizes this, the importance of saving presets.
Sure.
So why is that so crucial, and what's the recommended way to do it in the guide?
Yeah, after you've spent all that time, getting everything dialed in just the way you like it,
Yeah.
saving those settings as presets, it's just essential. It means you can easily go back to them.
Right.
If you accidentally change something,
Yeah.
or if your DSP gets reset for whatever reason, or even, if you want to experiment with different tunings for different types of music.
Right.
So the MuscleMemory guide, it recommends going into the preset tab in the software,
Okay.
selecting a preset number, and importantly, not overriding the default setting.
Right, yeah.
And then giving your preset a name that, describes what it is,
Yeah.
so you remember.
Yeah, yeah.
And Joseph even suggests saving your main tune to like a few different preset slots,
Okay,
just as like a backup in case you accidentally overwrite one.
got it.
So, it's like having multiple save points in a video game.
Right.
It just gives you that extra peace of mind
Yeah,
that, you're not going to lose all your progress.
absolutely, yeah. And beyond saving it within the DSP itself, the guide also recommends making a backup
Okay.
of your entire tuning configuration to a computer.
Right.
So why is that backup step so important?
It's like having the ultimate safety net.
Okay.
If something catastrophic happens to your DSP,
Right.
or if you need to reinstall the software or update the firmware, having that backup on your computer means you can restore everything exactly as it was.
Okay.
You don't have to start from scratch. It's a small extra step that could save you a lot of time and frustration in the long run.
Absolutely, yeah. Can't overstate the importance of backups. All right, so to wrap up this deep dive into Joseph Norton's DSP Muscle Memory Guide, we've gone through, really methodical approach to setting up and tuning a DSP in your vehicle. We started with those safety precautions, went through organizing channels, directing the audio signals with those crossovers, verifying that all your connections are correct. We looked at time alignment, which is really crucial for getting that focused sound stage,
Yeah.
and explored a practical way to kind of tune by ear and get the sound that you like.
Right.
And of course, the importance of saving all your settings, both to the DSP and backed up on a computer.
Absolutely. And as we've discussed, even though Joseph's guide is, he does mention some specific MuscleMemory stuff in there. The core principles of this, of getting your system ready, setting those channels up, the signal path, making sure everything's connected and working, time alignment, tuning the sound to your liking. These are all things that apply to pretty much any aftermarket DSP that you might be using.
Yeah.
The key is to understand those underlying concepts.
Right.
And then apply them, within your own device and its interface.
Yeah.
And, we really wanted to focus today on keeping those concepts clear, not getting bogged down in like super technical details.
Absolutely, yeah. Keeping it straightforward.
Yeah, just the essentials.
So we hope that this deep dive has taken some of the mystery out of, setting up a DSP and shown that, getting fantastic car audio is it's totally doable, even if you're not an audio engineer.
Absolutely.
We focused on that what and the why and trying to keep it simple.
For sure.
So this brings us to a final thought. How might a better understanding of your car's audio system, really empower you to take control of your listening experience? Maybe this has sparked an idea for you to explore the settings on your own DSP with a little more confidence, keeping these concepts in mind.
That's it.
And who knows, maybe a future deep dive into those more advanced topics like using an RTA mic could be something to consider down the road.
Yeah, for those who really want to get, into the nitty gritty.
Absolutely, yeah. So until then, happy listening.
Enjoy the music.
We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.